CBS 6 News at 6 starts with a breaking news alert.
This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions.
One of the most shocking tragedies to impact our state, region, and nation in a generation. A deadly collision between an Army helicopter and a commercial passenger plane on final approach to Reagan National Airport in Arlington. As we continue to learn more about last night's deadly crash and the investigation, we thank you for joining us here at 6. I'm Bill Fitzgerald.
And I'm Janine Samuels. We have complete team coverage tonight on the collision that has left 67 people presumed dead. And as we learn more about tonight's deadly crash and the investigation, we welcome you to CBS 6 News at 6.
Recovery efforts on the Potomac River continued Thursday afternoon in one of the deadliest U.S. aviation accidents in recent history. CCTV captured the moment when an Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with an American Airlines regional jet as it prepared to land at Reagan National Airport last night.
At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident.
The National Transportation Safety Board is leading the investigation into how the collision occurred.
We have not recovered the flight data recorders yet. We know they're there. They are underwater.
President Trump appeared in the briefing room requesting a moment of silence for the victims.
We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers.
He then quickly pointed a finger at the previous administration's hiring practices.
The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative.
Democrats pushed back.
For the President of the United States to throw out idle speculation as bodies are still being recovered and families still being notified. It just turns your stomach.
Flights have resumed here at Reagan National Airport after they were paused for nearly 14 hours, though several hundred were canceled and others delayed.
American Eagle Flight 5342 originated in Wichita, Kansas, where a prayer service was held Thursday.
But the only way that we will get through this is together.
Officials say flight conditions were clear Wednesday night. Erica Brown, CBS News, Arlington, Virginia.
CBS News has confirmed one air traffic controller one person was working tonight. That is actually a job that is normally done by two people. Now, some of Virginia's top leaders have been reacting to the news of the crash. Here's what they had to say.
As the first light touched the Potomac River Thursday morning, Virginians and the rest of the nation got their first real glimpse of the stunning crash site and a rescue operation that had sadly shifted into recovery mode.
We offer our profound condolences to them and our sorrow for this tragedy.
During a morning news conference, the anguish could be read on the faces of the Commonwealth's congressional delegation and also heard in their voices.
I was coming back from the district from a dinner to my home in Old Town Alexandria. And while I did not see the collision, I wondered, I'd never seen this many red lights streaming towards the airport and across the river in Maryland about this time.
A common theme amongst the officials and lawmakers was praise for the selflessness of the first responders and how cities and counties from across the region were quick to send help when the proverbial alarm was sounded.
People came from as far away as Baltimore, Fairfax County.
An altruistic attitude, Senator Tim Kaine says, reminded him of things he witnessed during his early days in government.
Even in the midst of a tragedy, it does give you a sense of appreciation and pride in people's willingness to come to the danger and work together. And I started to see that as a local official 30 years ago in Richmond and definitely have seen it here.
The Army helicopter involved in the collision was based at Fort Belvoir, a Virginia Army installation about 17 miles south of Reagan National Airport.
The Black Hawk belonged to B Company, Bravo Company, 12th Aviation Battalion. Again, that has been grounded for 48 hours, an operational pause.
Governor Glenn Youngkin among those wanting answers about the cause of the collision, but saying the immediate focus should be on the victims and their loved ones.
There are lots of questions, lots of really important questions to be answered, but the work today is to make sure that everyone is recovered and that families are given the tremendous support that they will need.
Something echoed by his colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
There'll be a time to figure out what happened and how we rectify it. But today, our thoughts and prayers ought to be with the families and, again, thanking our first responders.
The crash is bringing back haunting memories for many. We spoke with a woman who's lived in the greater D.C. area her whole life. She said as soon as she heard the news, it reminded her of what happened in 1982. A plane leaving Reagan National heading to Florida crashed into the 14th Street Bridge, and she was almost on that flight. Our Elizabeth Holmes spoke with her. Elizabeth?
We talked with a woman who's lived in the greater D.C. area her entire life, and when she heard the news about what happened here last night, she said it sent her right back to 1982 when a flight leaving Reagan National crashed into the 14th Street Bridge and landed in the Potomac. She told us it was a flight that she could have been on.
I hear a plane crashed in the Potomac, and that took me back, because it takes me back to the Air Florida flight.
Jean Mallon remembers January 13th, 1982 clearly.
The Air Florida jetliner crashed into the Potomac River at 3:55 yesterday afternoon.
The day Air Florida Flight 90, leaving Reagan National, crashed into the 14th Street Bridge and into the Potomac. The flight she was nearly on.
Normally we flew Air Florida, but we didn't because we got a cheaper rate on another airline that no longer exists, People's Express, and we were going to leave the next day.
A familiar feeling of pain and sorrow returned 43 years and 16 days later when a military helicopter crashed into an American Airlines flight coming into Reagan.
Everybody who called was hysterical. A next-door neighbor called. She was hysterical. And by the time I was through with it, I was just like, it was more than I could bear. So it was like all of that came tumbling back, you know, with this last night, and it's just awful.
Mallon says the area is always flooded with air traffic.
I mean, I'm not an expert at this, but, you know, it just doesn't look right.
CBS 6 did talk to a source familiar with military flight in the area who said the busy flight patterns are normal and navigating them is part of military training. Mallon wonders, though, if it was just a matter of time before something like this happened.
I mean, it's just an awful, horrible thing that has happened. And it hurts. It hurts everybody. You know, it's like your chest hurts from all the, it's pain that you feel for other people. And it shows the empathy that as Americans we do have for one another.
Now, the source that we spoke with said several small errors or last-minute changes may have led up to this crash, and they also said that a change in altitude by just mere feet would have made the difference. They also said it is completely feasible that the folks operating the helicopter may not have seen that American Airlines flight, and that's based on the aircraft's positioning and the lighting last night. At Reagan National, I'm Elizabeth Holmes, CBS 6 News.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Richmond's local skating community, like so many skating communities across the nation, is mourning the loss of the contingent of skaters, coaches, and families on board that plane they knew or knew of, who they say are all part of a tight-knit family. I stopped by the Richmond Ice Zone this afternoon and spoke to two coaches who say the tragedy is devastating.
We don't really think of each other as different countries in figure skating. We're all just one giant group.
The scene at Richmond Ice Zone Thursday was one you might see at any rink across the country. Skaters of different skill levels, all working at the sport they love.
One of my very best friends that works in this town is, as I said before, from Ukraine. And she and I even competed against each other, not knowing that we did when we first met. That's how long ago we had met.
For Eric Meyer, those bonds made Wednesday night's aviation disaster feel like a family tragedy.
The entire ice skating community is hurting.
That hurt came to Meyer, a former competitive skater and coach who's the operations manager at Richmond Ice Zone, on what had been his routine drive to work.
When I was listening to the news, and I heard about the plane crash, and right at the tail end, it was almost like an afterthought that there were figure skating people on there, and that it was in D.C., I got a bad feeling, and you just hoped. I texted a lot of people in D.C. just saying, please tell me you're alive.
Myers says he had just gotten out of his car when the messages started coming about Sasha Kirsanov, a fellow coach who was also a former skater who was on board that American Airlines flight.
One of my students who trained here with me for 10 years texted me, and whenever you get a text that says, call me, and that's it, and there's been a tragedy, okay, I should probably call this girl. So I called her, and she was upset. She was best friends with Sasha's daughter, and she just wanted to let me know.
For me, I know one of the coaches. I've gotten to work with him in the past. I know he lost 3 of his students in the crash, and a lot of friends.
Casey Jefferson, a coach and manager at Richmond Ice Zone and a former competitor himself, says he knows a lot of skaters and coaches will be using their work to honor their lost friends and team members.
As we're skating, performing, we emote so much emotion and bring a lot of that out, and skating can be healing in that.
And tonight, the question on the minds of so many, how could this crash have happened? Our Melissa Hippolyte spoke to a man who flew planes for decades for his insights.
As a flight from Kansas approached Reagan National Airport, air traffic control asked the pilots if they could land on a different runway. The pilot said yes and changed course. At the same time, air traffic control checked in with a military helicopter that was crossing through the airspace and asked if they saw the airplane. The pilot of the helicopter responded yes, that he had visual separation, meaning he saw the plane. But Virginia Tech professor and aerospace engineer Dr. Ella Atkins says she believes the pilot of the helicopter must not have actually seen the airplane.
They were saying right up until the final seconds that they had visual separation, and it was not long after that they hit.
Captain Ross Amer, who is retired from United Airlines, says Reagan National's airspace is extremely busy with a high number of planes constantly landing and taking off from an airport with short runways that was not designed for modern times. And while that's happening, helicopters are crisscrossing the airspace. He compared the helicopters to humans on bicycles trying to cross a busy freeway.
Why hasn't anything been done about this in the past? Why was this just allowed to happen where you've got this set up with so many planes and then these crisscrossing helicopters?
We rely on the excellence, like I said, of the air traffic controllers and the pilots that commit miracles every day. And we depend on some technology. And you ask why we allow that. It's just, if we don't, then everything goes to stop. The only way you could take care of it is just to stop all the traffic, which we can't.
Captain Amer said he was not surprised to hear about the crash and said he had been warning folks about something like this happening for years because the air traffic system is so busy, it's to the point of breaking.
You have to follow this river crisscross while you're swatting gnats, which are the helicopters. It's just crazy.
Dr. Atkins says we actually have the technology to avoid crashes like this, and she hopes this incident will lead to new technology being transitioned into all aircraft.
I'm talking about potentially having automation that steers your helicopter or airplane away from another one, even if the crew is not very situationally aware.
Now, Dr. Atkins also told me she believes this crash could lead to a change in the rules with regard to the use of visual separation, and perhaps it won't be allowed to be used as frequently. I'm Melissa Hippolyte for CBS 6. Janine?
All right, thank you, Melissa. State lawmakers who are still at work on Capitol Square in Richmond are reacting to the news of the tragedy in Washington, D.C. Our Cameron Thompson shares their voices.
Prayers to the families. This is a tough day for Virginia and the nation.
A somber day at the state capitol.
It's an awful tragedy. We don't really have a lot of information yet, but my thoughts are with the families of the people who who perished last night.
As state lawmakers work through session while watching the aftermath of Wednesday night's crash in Northern Virginia. State Senator Adam Eben represents the district that surrounds Reagan National Airport where the plane and helicopter crash happened.
You see so many aircraft very low approaching the airport, and it's normally a very safe operation, but it's a very busy one.
Mr. Speaker, it was really hard to find the words today following that devastating incident that took place over my district last night.
As does Delegate Adele McClure, who spoke about the crash on the House floor, asking the adjourn in honor of those who lost their lives.
This morning we were dismayed to learn that there were believed to be no survivors, and the family and loved ones of those we lost weigh heavy on our hearts this morning, Mr. Speaker.
A moment of silence was also held during the morning meeting of the Aviation and Aerospace Caucus. And while offering condolences to the victims, lawmakers also gave praise to the many first responders from Virginia and elsewhere who rushed to the crash to help.
It's something that they're never going to forget.
This includes Prince William County, where Senator Jeremy McPike serves as a volunteer assistant fire chief. He says they would be facing physical challenges in the immediate aftermath and mental ones for much longer.
When you have that amount of loss of life, it takes a real toll. It takes a real toll on first responders. And obviously our heart goes out to all those who lost their lives.
Meanwhile, Governor Glenn Youngkin, who was on scene at Reagan this morning, says they are offering every support to the NTSB with their investigation into the crash. But right now, the focus is on those recovery efforts and providing support to the families of their loved ones. At the state capitol, Cameron Thompson, CBS 6 News.
You can follow our continuous coverage of the collision online at WTBR.com.